Shota Dighmelashvili is editor-in-chief at Forbes Georgia. He's a policy entrepreneur and a dedicated civil society leader. His work has earned global acknowledgement and has been featured in many renowned media outlets. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Please, at the end of this video, if you've got value from it, make sure you like, check you are subscribed so you don't miss out on any of the fantastic speakers and content that we feature. Thank you also to everyone who has become a patron or bought me a coffee, and especially, of course, to those who have supported the documentary film project that we are currently working on. It's hugely appreciated. Your support is absolutely essential, and that project would not happen without it. Shota, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to the channel.
Thank you for the opportunity. As I said, it's an honor and privilege.
Well, we're going to be looking at events happening in Georgia, but we're also going to be looking at the underlying mechanics of state capture. Because what's happening in Georgia, it seems to me, is not just an isolated process. It's not just Russia trying to manipulate and control a single country. It strikes me that there is a toolkit, a methodology, a series of steps that Russia can either use directly or it can export to its allies and proxies. It's a way of degrading institutions and taking over a state. And it seems to me that process can take years to roll out because Putin has time. Autocracies don't work on the same timescales as democracies. Is this paranoid thinking, or is this mechanics of state capture a real thing?
No, I don't think that it's paranoid thinking because Georgia's civil society and the whistleblowers have been observing the trend since, I would say, 2015, 2016 with the current government, which nobody believed that the current government was connected to Russia, nor the international partners. I've had the opportunity to communicate with various embassies, and he was kind of the West initially used to like him because he was not too confrontational. That is the hard truth. He was not too confrontational with Russia. And of course, like when we talk about Georgia, the West would not like Georgia to be the apple of discord within this larger framework, especially in that era, right? It's like 2012 to 2016, when Russia still is perceived as a partner and in various important sectors, most prominently energy sector, and is integrated in the financial systems of the West, firmly integrated. And there is this liberal framework, right? The best way to avoid the war is to integrate Russia in the Western systems, which was prevalent in. It's our how we view it might not be a fact, but especially after 2008 war, shortly after when international partners started recharging and shaking hands again with Putin on various Davos forums, even letting him in the Security Council of UN. That was the Georgian perception. So to say that Georgia is not that valuable to become, as I said, the apple of discord, and there is a larger geopolitics at work, where the West views Russia as the partner. So Georgia was staunchly against Russia, especially after the war in 2008. But I would say Georgia, as an independent country, started as a protest against Russian Soviet rule. The contemporary Georgian state is a result of the civil society struggling against the influence of Russia. The perception in Georgia is that in 2016 about the soft power was that, okay, it exists, but more radical groups were perceived as, yes, paranoid, but it was always there. The whistleblowers were there, and they said that, okay, these policies we are currently having, the foreign policies, we are slowly gravitating back to the Russian orbit, and the soft power is at work. All these troll farms and the impact that the Russian propaganda is having, but it was not addressed properly, nor internally nor externally. So yes, I would agree with you that no, it's not paranoid thinking. It has been going on for a while.
And it's remarkable, isn't it? Given that there was a huge aggression in 2008, the war that you mentioned there, and Moscow's attempts to divide Georgia, even to annex a relatively large chunk of territory and to sow division. And of course, the historic enmity. I mean, Georgians aren't exactly the biggest fans of Muscovy. If we go back into the sort of imperial history and the attempt that Georgia has made to sort of break away and form a separate identity, in some ways, paralleling that process that's happened in Ukraine, that makes it even more extraordinary. This shift of Georgian orientation as a state, placing it back almost within Moscow's orbit.
Yes, what we should understand that this is not a public sentiment. The opinion polls are done annually for years, and critical majority of Georgian people. It's like fluctuating, but 76 to 80% of the people regularly say that we want Euro-Atlantic integration, and it's been the sentiment has been there for ages, right? So it's even now when government is actively undermining Georgia's Euro-Atlantic path, most prominently with the accession of with the postponing, they call it postponing, but people do understand that the window of opportunity to open negotiations with European Union is now, and that window might close because we never know when there will be another wave of expansion, another wave of enlargement of EU, right? Now we do have a window of opportunity, which was triggered by Russia's heinous attack on Ukraine. But the Georgian government says that, okay, we're still going to EU, but we're doing it our way. The reason that they do not say candidly, that they do not say that, okay, we're pivoting and we are changing our geopolitical vector, is precisely that the majority of the population still, not still, but always were faithful to this geopolitical vector of European integration, and it's historical. For example, 5th century king of Georgia, Vakhtang Gorgasali, in his will, he wrote, "Never abandon the way of Greeks." So it's from the 5th century. And when Georgia started as a, well, I wouldn't say contemporary, but our first republic, when it started as a nation state back in 1917, he had this brief 3 years of independence, 1918 to 1921. We can simply look at the constitution, and the constitution had habeas corpus, the universal suffrage, the proportional elections, trial by jury. So each and every ballot points we are fighting for now in 21st century. And it was like, the government was, the system was European, which was noticed by European leaders as well. Then after Soviet invasion, we had this 70 years of Soviet system, and then we broke off again. And that's how we arrived to the point. And it was always like Georgian when they based their Georgian identity is based on like now contemporary identities that we are not Russians, because we had to prove for the last during the Soviet rule and afterwards that we are different. We are not them, nor ethnically, nor throughout historically, nor culturally. So it's like very deeply ingrained in Georgian sense of belonging that we are not Russian. So like saying the government declaring that, okay, we are turning ourselves into some kind of protectorate again, as we did in 1800s, it would not work in Georgia. So the current incumbent government has this sneaky strategy of saying that, okay, we pursue European path, but we are doing it our way with dignity, but at the same time appeasing Russia. So that is the situation.
We have to look at this, I think, in a broad context as well, because it may feel like Georgia is, from the European perspective, is far away from the center of Europe. If you're looking at it from Tbilisi, from Georgia, I think it feels the other way, that there's very much this pull to be part of Europe and association with Europe. But it's part of a larger process that's unfolding. It seems that Russia has been trying to roll out this process of state capture, and it exists in different stages in different countries. You know, Hungary is far further down that route. Serbia is far down that route. Slovakia, others are, got partial state capture. And it's like an evolutionary process. You can sort of look at it at different stages of that evolution. There has been an attempt in Romania, which seems to have been foiled. Moldova currently is looking interesting, let's say. I mean, there was an attempt there to roll out the state capture process that's failed. Now it looks like the gas is going to be switched off to Transnistria. That's creating a crisis in Moscow's puppet enclave there. Syria has spectacularly imploded. Do we see that? I mean, this is interesting because it suggests that the process of state capture is not necessarily inevitable. You can oppose it at every stage of that process as it rolls out. Of course, maybe it gets more and more difficult further down that process, but it perhaps gives us some hope that this toolkit is not inevitable, as it were.
I hope so. I sincerely hope so. And yes, the pattern is clear. Russia occupies 20% of Georgia through unrecognized separatist de facto regimes. The same is with Moldova, right? Transnistria, you mentioned, and now Ukraine also 20%. So the pattern is clear. But now when the Russia is mainly focused on the war in Ukraine, it's on its back foot. Yes, we saw it in Syria. We saw it in Romania. We saw it in the election process in Moldova, which was really close elections, and we hoped that we would have the same situation with our elections, our last elections in October 2024. But our problems have evolved during this 12 years of oligarchic rule, and are a bit complex in the for example, like Bidzina Ivanishvili, the current leader, the factual leader of Georgia, his net worth equals 1/3 of Georgia's GDP. So if we compare it with Ukraine before the revolution and Moldova, there are some oligarchs, but there are several oligarchs competing between each other, right? For Georgia, it's a single oligarch who has massive capital. And also, if we, at one point, Georgia's whole minister cabinet was Bidzina Ivanishvili's ex-employees. For example, health minister of healthcare during the COVID crisis was his private dentist. Minister of internal affairs, his ex-CEO of his private bank, kharpp. The minister of the chief of this SUSI department with security services, which is totally special service with totally unchecked power. The head was the chief of his private bodyguard team. The prime minister himself, Haribashvili, used to book airplanes for him, and used to be nanny of his second-born child, Bera, in US. So the picture is clear. And the guy himself, Bidzina Ivanishvili, he did not occupy any formal position. So he was kind of beyond the spectrum of the politics. And during these years, the system has been cleansed, and it has become as close to univocal as it can get. There's no dissent. There's no single institution left to stand up to the will of the oligarch. We practically don't have the division of government. All three branches fall under the executive branch of government, and the executive branch falls under Bidzina. So that makes our struggles even harder. And the only institution we've left is the president, which is the last elected president, Salome Zurabishvili, and her time runs out December 14. So we're left, the only institution left to oppose the power of the oligarch is the civil society itself, which is under the attack now. More than 500 people were hurt. Public defender visited 200 people detained during the protests, and 157 of them, it's observed that they were like tortured, and they were beaten up. So this is the situation. Are we heading to another Maidan? That is quite valid question, and we can elaborate on that topic.
Well, let's dive into that, because in the conversations I've had with other Georgians, of course, the energy has been intense in the first couple of weeks, but now people are getting to the point of exhaustion. At the same time, the authorities seem to be adopting more and more brutal methods. Almost, you could compare it to the Belarusian methods. Not only are they beating people on the streets, they are then going to people's homes and workplaces to abduct them. They're using that selective torture, selective pressure, so that then the ripples of that, they hope, I guess, will coerce people within a particular group if they make an example of individuals. We've seen this work before. At the same time, they're ramping up the propaganda. There is one difference, of course, here, and that is that the president of Georgia has sided with the protesters. That is a key point of difference, I think, with what happened in Belarus, because there was nobody on the official side really that was siding with the protesters. What do you think the state of play is? We also, I'm sorry for the lengthy question, but I've also seen images of especially young men in balaclavas starting to group. And this makes that sort of in some ways similar to Maidan, which is rather going down the Belarusian route, where the protesters were absolutely peaceful and didn't really offer any physical resistance to the police. And you can say on the one hand, that's because Belarusians are, incredibly civilized and genteel, but that also meant they were almost doomed to fail. If they're up against a force that is prepared to use violence without limits. Where is this going? And is there the opportunity there in the Georgian character to, meet force with force, to have that will and determination to try and resist the equivalent of the sort of berkut that we see being unleashed on the population?
Yes, I would say yes, because first of all, uh, both with Ukraine and Belarus, the support for the Western integration was not that big. It was like for Belarus, they protests was against the dictatorship, against the authoritarian rule, but not for joining EU, right? And with Ukraine, it was like 50-50 during Maidan. It was mostly against authoritarian rule as well. The defining factor of our protest is that Georgian protest is that it's for EU integration, because Georgians perceive it as an existential. Georgians perceive Russia as an existential threat, and they understand that if they don't fall under this Western security umbrella, tens of years of slavery might follow this. So the protest is pro-EU and anti dictatorship. That is one factor. Another is when people compare what's happening in Georgia to Maidan, I always say that we already had Maidan back in 2003, our Velvet Revolution. And it started this wave of colorful revolutions across the regions. So our Maidan, our revolution was Velvet Revolution, not a single not a single person losing the life, because the governments by then and now are really afraid of this, because the situation will spiral beyond the control if we have a single person losing the life on the streets. And we already had this experience of the civil war back in 90s, and even in 2012 the previous government did not want to concede the power, but they saw the danger that after losing the elections, but there was kind of a pause, but ultimately they conceded. And one of the reasons why they did that, apart from the West urging them to concede the power, is that they saw the chance of the blood in the streets. And Georgians, the national character of Georgians, it would be unforgiving to the ruling class. So even now we see these repressions, tortures, abducting people from, I don't know, recently the mother drove a child to the kindergarten, and the police was waiting for, the special forces were waiting for her there. That's where they abducted her. But still, and we've had a person in coma, but still we don't have we don't we don't have a lost life, and I hope it remains like this. And this is the effort by the government as well, because the government knows the single case could spiral the situation into the direction that they cannot possibly control, no matter the scale of repressions.
And that's important, isn't it? Because during Maidan, 100 people lost their lives through the actions of the Berkut. And of course, it is widely suspected things like Russian snipers and special agents working on behalf of the government. And even though there have now been literally hundreds of thousands of deaths as a result of Putin's actions, people still remember and honor those 100 who died during those protests. So it becomes a real beacon, a rallying point of those protests, doesn't it? And what fascinates me about this is that Bindiza Ivanishvili has been able to keep his sort of control and influence of the party in the background for so long, and they've been able to create the illusion that they are an independent government, that they are making decisions on behalf of the people, and they've been able to sort of slip in, I would say, those sort of Moscow-centric decisions in a way that have not necessarily raised flags with people. I mean, so many Georgians I've spoken to who understand actually how these processes work, who understand a lot of the way Moscow projects its influence, nonetheless still found themselves surprised when the mask came off, and the extent to which Georgian Dream has turned out to be a sort of almost a puppet operation of the Muscovite government. So it's one thing, isn't it, to understand these things theoretically. It's quite another to recognize that process unfolding in your own country.
Yes, and it's notable that Georgian Dream as a power, it started with as a coalition. So the concentration of power was gradual, because in the coalition it united practically the whole opposition existing back in 2012. Including, and most of them, I wouldn't say most, but nearly all of them, excluding a couple of parties, so a couple of small-scale parties. They were staunchly pro-Western parties, and the Georgian Dream started as a pro-West coalition, but at the same time they had this. They played on the fear of the war, and they promoted this policy of balancing between the Russia and West, and the West rolled with it, because again, nobody wants Georgia to be apple of discourse, the discord between this larger in these larger geopolitical processes, and the people as well, because they were so afraid of war, right? And even now, the fear they play on for, you said that now the Georgian Dream is unmasked. For the majority of people, yes, but there are some people who still believe that the Georgian Dream is not pro-Russian, and in fact it's pro-West, but it wants to join EU, want to take Georgia to EU with dignity. So with that. So yes, this is it's very similar to the campaigns that we witnessed in Hungary as well, the fear campaign that, okay, if Russia attacks, nobody will be here for us, and so on and so forth. And about your question, to get back to your question about this gradual change. The way the propaganda, the Russian propaganda was working in Georgia, it was really sneaky propaganda, because it was not like pro-Russian propaganda per se, because Russians do understand that in Georgia, population simply won't bite. So their talking points were something along the lines that, okay, Georgia is nor Europe nor Russia. Georgia is Georgia, and that kind of the propaganda. The talking point was that we don't need the Western influence, neither Western nor the Russian influence. But effectively, what it means for Georgia, like isolating itself from the West, it means that they're in the room with the bully, with Russia, right? So if Georgia does not fall under this security umbrella of the West, and if there is no other, if we negotiate, because we're not even, Georgia and Russia with their respective powers are not even, so they cannot negotiate evenly, right? So we need the West to mediate our I would say yes, negotiations, because Russia recognizes our breakaway regions. We don't have any diplomatic contacts yet, so officially, of course, because they're having the contacts with Russians now, but on official level, right? So we need the West in the room, but the propaganda talking point was that, okay, you don't need West, you need to talk with Abkhazians and Ossetians directly. We should balance with we should talk with Russia without the West in the room, and so on. That effectively meant the isolation of Georgia from the West, and then you can always play with this fear of war, especially after what happened in Ukraine, and we can and the policies of balance quickly turns itself into a policy of alignment. So yes, this was gradual. This was going on throughout the years. The concentration of power within the party, when Georgian Dream quit as the coalition, and Bidzina Ivanishvili concentrated the power within the party, and the concentration of power in the within the government, like the branches of the government slowly became the extensions of the party, and now we're facing the situation when where the only institution we've left is the president, and again the Georgian population.
And that's an interesting process, isn't it? Because you actually have to, in a state that has gone down the route of developing institutions to quite a high degree. There's quite a lot of machinery that you have to take over. You have to destroy the idea of independent parties or make opposition parties weaker. You have to make sure the legislature becomes a sort of rubber stamp. There are things like the Electoral Commission, constitutional courts. There are many institutions that need to be sort of co-opted. How does this unfold? Is there a common pattern, or does it vary by country? You know, the way that they roll out sort of nepotism, corruption, use compromat, money, influence, status. Is there a commonality in the way that happens, or is it unique to Georgia?
A bit of everything, a bit of everything, but I would say the main reason was our electoral system, which basically the party always ended up with the constitutional majority, the winning party. And when you have the constitutional majority, of course, it's easy to co-opt all these institutions, right? That's why we started protesting against the electoral system back in 2019. It's interesting that back in 2012, when Georgian Dream was still the opposition party, they promised us the proportional electoral system, because before that we had the mixed system, which the system was rigged in the way that the winning party always ended up with the constitutional majority, because we had these local feudals in place. The best example is, I don't know, for example, Deputy Enzel Koyani. He was deputy from the ruling party during Shevardnadze times, then after the Rose Revolution during UNM, then after the change of the government during Georgian Dream. And effectively how it works is that you have the local feudal in place, and these local feudals swap the parties. Whatever party is to win, they join that party, and they stay in the government. That's how the majoritarian system worked in Georgia. So the result was that the party which was victorious always ended up with constitutional majority and changed the constitution the way they saw fit. So that was the main problem. And it was the problem with Georgian Dream as well, which had promised people back in opposition and the first couple of years as a ruling party that they would change the electoral system in 2016. But in 2019, when we saw that the first alarming signs that, okay, something's wrong here, because we have Russian Duma deputy addressing Georgian people from Georgian parliament, from the seat of the chairman of the parliament. It happened in June 20th of 2019, which sparked the protests. The population saw what's happening, not in the scale not in the scale we're observing now, but the smaller scale. And the main demand of the protest, it was 100-day consecutive, for 100 days, consecutive 100 days, people stood out. Well, technically it was 94, but we like to round it up to 100. And the main demand of the protest was the change of electoral system from this mixed system to the proportional system. And that proportional system would allow us to have more democratic party politics without the constitutional majority each and every time. And that, as we, as civic society saw it, it would safeguard our institutions and and hold this backslide of democracy. And we were successful. We ended up with first in we ended up with the change of the electoral system to the proportional system, but the threshold remains high, 5%, and that keeps polarization in place. But now these elections, because it was fully proportional elections, we have already 4 opposition parties in the parliament. But it's a bit too late, because all the institutions which to provide checks and balances for the government, which doesn't hold constitutional majority anymore, but it still wields this immense power because of the degradation of institutions throughout these years before we got the new electoral system. And it was effectively because of this one-man rule and constitutional majority.
And there are other institutions of state that need to be controlled, aren't there? So, for instance, the police, and especially having a militarized militia type of police becomes, it seems, an essential part. So behind the scenes, is that being invested in? Is that being built up? Are you, would they be looking at people who are part of that militarized police and creating the sense amongst them that, they are special, unique, they're different from the population, that they somehow are the guardians of certain values which are under threat? I mean, you almost have to create this sort of mini dictatorship within these militarized militia in order to retain their loyalty control. And then there's the question of the army, private armies, even cadres of presidential troops, for instance, to directly protect the regime. We see all of this in Russia. In fact, it never went away. It was already there in the 90s. And what has happened in Georgia to develop these sort of instruments of coercion control when you need them, as of course they are not just needing them at the moment, but they are unleashing them in a more and more brutal way.
Mhm. The thing with the police is that it was never fully depoliticized. The previous government, we've observed the politicization of the police forces during the previous government as well. But the scale of it now is record-breaking, and the dissent, the system throughout the years was cleaned. System was cleaned throughout the years from the figures from anybody who might have any dissent with the policy they're having now in the police. And yes, there was very special attitude within the police. They built living blocks they were kind of isolated from the rest of the society. They're building the whole block nearby on Gikia Street, only exclusively for the police. And they were what we've observed throughout the years is that this kind of tradition of initiation, like this fraternity type of initiation within the police. For example, we've had the experience of manifesting for years, right, already. And our administrative code is practically Soviet administrative code with minor changes. And coincidentally, it was drafted back in 1984, which is funny. So our administrative code basically allows police to detain anybody and then act as a witness. Basically, they can, for 48 hours, they can detain anybody and then sentence them for like 2 weeks. And we attended these court hearings, of course, and the most common pattern we see that the police is often the false witness, and the most prominent pattern is that the police officers who witness against the activists are never the ones who perform the arrest themselves. And most of them always are very young. They look like the freshmen, like they look like straight out of the universities. So now we understood it as a kind of an initiation process that, okay, once you sign under that and you're beyond the red line, once you act as a false witness, once you are police there to protect and serve, and you act as a false witness, it places you, you're already a hostage of a system, right? And you already broke the rules, you already broke the oath. And then there are this isolation of the police from the rest of the population, the rest of the society, building them their own living quarters. And now they have a new legislation that you don't need any vetting to join the police and security forces. You can simply be appointed by the minister, so you don't have to undergo any training. So basically, the unemployment in Georgia is huge, up to 15%, and they'll grab people from the violent people from the streets, as we understand them, and give them the badge, the gun, and chase us down. This is society. So this process has peaked now, but the process was there, gradually developing, going in that direction.
And another interesting aspect, again, I think this happened, in fact, this probably never went away in Russia, because there is a huge number of people, indeed families, groups, who have either directly or through family members inherited the status, influence, position they hold in society, whether that is in the cultural sphere, in the media sphere, or politics, and especially the intelligence services. There is a kind of almost call it a Soviet aristocracy, and the persistence of these elites, I think, is one of the features that marks Russia out compared to other post-Soviet states, where the proportion of those elites that have maintained their power and status is not non-existent, but it is far lower than in Russia. So is this an important tool of this authoritarian slide and this state capture? Is the ability of the state to be the one body that bestows privilege and status onto individuals, and to ensure that an increasing amount of the total income that is given out within a state, that the government actually controls, influences that, right down to the level of being able to put pressure on large, supposedly independent corporations, to ensure that they are aligned with the state, to ensure that they in turn put pressure on their employees to support the state. Now we know that's how it absolutely works in Russia. You cannot operate in the cultural sphere, in the media sphere, or you cannot be part of a corporation and be a vocal opponent of the government. That's not how it works. Your companies and your wealth and your status will be taken away from you. But is this the sort of sliding scale of that process taking place in Georgia as well?
Yeah, it's interesting point that you mentioned, the Soviet aristocracy. We had the same, because Georgian directors and cultural figures were during Soviet era, they were like famous, and they found after breakup of the Soviet Union, they did have the immense respect, but they found themselves bankrupt. And suddenly, the great philanthropist Bidzina Ivanishvili made an appearance and just gave them the allowance, which was every month. It was like an allowance they got from Bidzina Ivanishvili, and that's for fact how he appeared on the political scene as a philanthropist. That's why he became so popular, because he was not a media figure before that. There were only 2 pictures of him available. Nobody knew how he even looked, but everybody have heard the name, this mystic, rich, wealthy philanthropist who takes care of our cultural figures, right? So in Georgian experience, it was not the state, but Bidzina Ivanishvili, the oligarch himself. The oligarch had all this Soviet aristocracy on his payroll. As for the private sector, the public sector was never depoliticized, and public sector was employees of the public sector were never very loud about their dissent historically in Georgia, because when unemployment is high, and it used to be up to 20%, now it's below 15, but it's huge, and it's more than 200,000 people, up to 300,000 people who work for the government companies. And if we're talking about the regions, not Tbilisi, the government might be the only employer in the regions, and it's hard to be on the government payroll. And as the ruling party frames it, it's the party payroll, not government payroll. So people employed in the public sector remain silent. And as for the businesses, well, most of the businesses, they donate to the ruling party, whether they support the ruling party or not. It's a kind of a political tradition, because again, the financial police, for example, is not not an independent entity. And it falls under the influence, and the influence is the soft word of the ruling party. So the businesses who spoke up have always had the problems with the financial police entering the companies. We've had an experience when we staged protest back in 2019. It's a quite personal experience, because I had the honor and the privilege to lead the protest march back in 2019, and we rented the display. We rented some tech from some company, like not a huge company, but they had this materials we could use on our protest. They didn't just give it to us. We rented it, the display, just to have some to show some movies during the protests, and so on and so forth, sound amplifiers and so on, the requisites you need on the protests, right? And the second day, the financial police went into the company. We had one of our banners made in one of the hotels, and the second day, the director of the hotel personally told me that he got the call from above that, okay, you're helping them out. He was not, it just happened on his territory. He was not even informed that it was happening. So that is the situation. So business cannot be very vocal about their dissent, but at the same time, with the protests we're having currently, they do understand that isolation of Georgia is the death of the business, because foreign direct investments took a dive, 55%, if I'm not mistaken, already. So it's huge, and the Georgian economy is immensely, it's over financialized. We don't have any industries. We don't have any natural resources. So our economy is basically run by the financial sector and the banks. And two of the banks hold like 80% of the market, and they're listed on London Stock Exchange, for example. And their SWIFT depends, their ability to operate depends on the Western SWIFT. The one from German and one from American bank. And let's imagine the hypothetical situation that the West demands targeted sanctions, and at the same time we have the local legislation prohibiting Georgian banks to impose the sanctions unless unless the local court verifies the sanctions. Then we have this conundrum that the banks are obliged to place the sanctions on certain individuals, but at the same time, they're not led by the local legislation to do so. That basically takes the SWIFT code for the SWIFT falls under the risk. And if the banking sector goes down, then the whole economy goes down, because the financial sector and the development sector are the most, they have the hugest chunk from our gross of our gross domestic product. So I don't know. The business now understand that they should not support the path of isolationism. The Georgian government has set is pursuing now, but at the same time they cannot be they express their concerns, they express their protests, but at the same time they cannot be too vocal about it. They cannot stop operating for the while, and they cannot pressure the government themselves, although they are the donors of the government. This is simply how the system works here. If you do not donate to the ruling party as a business, then you're having problems down the road. So that's one of the problems, the asymmetry of the resources, right? Because the opposition parties cannot depend on the local businesses for the financing, and they are dependent on the government financing themselves. And the government financing is the decisions are made by the party. So we have in academic circle, this competitive authoritarianism on steroids. It's not like full-blown authoritarianism. We still have this I don't know what Putin calls like sovereign democracy, but the institutions are there, but institutions are not free. And the businesses are there, the private sector is there. It's not all the government sector, but they are not free. So yes, it's a very complex situation. I don't know. It's very interesting how it will unravel itself.
Well, really, there's sort of two questions left. One relates to this, and of course, I think this is not really that well understood outside of countries that have gone through this process. That's why I think it's difficult for people to see it happening. Now, I think it's fascinating that Trump, for instance, is obsessed with tariffs. And of course, the obsession there, or the media is focusing very much on external tariffs. But what's less understood is by imposing external tariffs, you're essentially imposing internal tariffs as well. You're forcing higher prices and warped market conditions on certain industries. So this is a tool that, yes, you can use it as a populist tool. You can use it to put pressure on your, competitive states, authoritarian competitive states like China, but also it creates huge uncertainty and pressure, and indeed a force for internal corporations to comply so they can lobby against these being used. So I think this is an instrument of state capture. It's a capricious instrument of state capture. Which is operating in plain sight. But there are other things as well. You've mentioned using the tax inspectorate, but back, when I worked in Russia, there are many instruments that were used to exert sort of local control, and then, as we know, Putin went from being really in control of St. Petersburg to the whole country. But these instruments were experimented with there. They will use things like the fire department to threaten to close down your business. They'll use the sort of licensing system for products. Essentially, your product or your retail organization or whatever can suddenly be taken out of the market. And then you use things like hostile takeovers and other coercive techniques that subvert the rule of law. Is Georgia on that path? Do you recognize some of these mechanics that have been used?
Yes, of course. The most prominent example is the deep sea port, Anaglia port, which was which is a geopolitical project because of this huge, especially after the Russia's war in Ukraine. It's very strategic to have one more deep sea port on the Black Sea, and it was. The project should have been delivered by the consortium of US and Georgian companies, and the main actor from Georgia was Mamuka Khazaradze, currently in opposition, the founder of Georgia's major financial institution, TBC Bank. So basically, Georgian Dream Party, they started the case against TBC Bank. Mamuka Khazaradze had to resign as cut his ties with his own business, and then the court took away the the whole project, the Anaklia Deep Sea Port project. I, for the lack of the better word, I forgot the word. I'm sorry. How, that happens.
I'll cut that bit out,
After
don't worry.
COVID, I have this weird brain
Brain
fog.
fog. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll remember it gradually. But yes, the project was taken from them and given to some Chinese company, and it was taken by the government using the judiciary. So basically, what we observed was the deep sea port is very strategic, logistical, and I would say it would be historical milestone for Georgia because it would put Georgia on this geopolitical map of the transit after. Especially after the war in Ukraine, when all this cargo has to find a different route after sanctioning Russia, right? And they effectively took the port from local and US local business and US business consortium and gave it to Chinese consortium, and now the government is involved itself in building that port, right? So this is one of the examples of governments taking over the business. Like there is, of course, the private sector still exists, but it falls under the control of the government, even if the stakeholders from US and EU are involved. So it happened gradually. First, it was like the mild pressure on the smaller companies, and then the appetite grew in the process. So yes, I would say the pattern is the same as in Russia. We're not there yet because still there are some businessmen expressing their opinions, but it's simply the expression of the opinion and not the pressure on the government. And if the government wins now, if the protests are gone and this repressive laws stay in place, I'm sure that Georgian private sector will feel it on their skin, and we'll have the same situation as in Belarus and as in Russia. That makes this wave of protest immensely important.
And the last question here, well, there's 1,000 questions I could fire at you, but the last question here, if the protests, and it seems to be almost a sort of describe it as a life and death struggle. Either regime goes or the protesters win. There seems to be no middle ground possible now, as the masks have been ripped off. What we've seen in Belarus and indeed in Putin's Russia, they're not that keen to build huge concentration camps. Yes, they'll have prisons and so on, and terrible things will go on, but they're quite happy to see dissidents leave. In fact, certainly in Russia in 2021, there was a big effort to use the courts, to use networks of communication, people who are criticizing the government but still have connections within, let's say, the security services, use this sort of coded message and fear to say, look, you got to get out, you got to go. So there's this almost economical repression, which is forcing your opposition out. Is this the most likely scenario, that if the protests fail, and don't dislodge the government, you may see a mass exodus of people involved in civic society, people involved in the protests?
Yes, it has already started. I experienced it firsthand back in 2020, when my friend, I have not seen him for like ages, childhood friend, and I know that it's straight out of KGB textbooks, came to me, and okay, now I'm working with them, and I've seen the case. It was the drug planting plants there, like they want to plant drugs and put your we have draconic anti drug laws. You can go for 8 to 20 years in prison for 1 gram of illegal substance, just a single gram. So it's actively used to blackmail young people. So and there was I firsthand experienced it, that okay, you need to go. Yes. And we are already seeing like more than 200,000 people have left last year. And what's interesting about Georgia is more people are born here than die annually, but the population is still diminishing. It's because of the immigration. It's economic immigration, first of all. Yes, because unemployment is high, especially in age group 18 to 35. It's up to it's over 30% of unemployment. So yes, young people have motivation to leave, but there is also this political this political factor as well, because especially after this new legislation with foreign agents law, right? Most of the people who were employed in NGO sector will not will not say that they're the agents of foreign influence because of this patriotic sentiments. I am one of the examples. I had founded 2 NGOs, anti-corruption NGO, Squander Detector, and the Shame Movement, which organized protests back in 2019. And we simply know that we will close down our organization because we will not register as the agents of foreign influence. And most of the civic society organization, even the organizations working with vulnerable groups, and not only this anti-corruption investigation organizations, they said that we're not doing this. So basically, if you lose your right to operate as a civil society organization, and at the same time you cannot go to the private sector because it's under the control of the government, and the public sector is also close to you. That forces you out, right, out of the country. And then there is this threatening and blackmailing of the most active protesters that, okay, you need to leave. They're preparing the case against you. The last example was Mariam Nikuradze, the head of OC Media. You might have heard about the situation with her. The list of the potential arrestees was exposed, and Mariam was part of the list. So yes, it's ongoing, and it started slow, but now we have come to the stage when lots of people will choose to emigrate because, well, I don't know, like our fathers had protested against Russia, we have protested against Russia, and now we realize that our children will have to do the same, be under the repressive system, and be in danger always if they choose to do their work and to not to do the Russia's bidding, or not to bend the knee. So this is not only the choice out of fear, but the pragmatic choice. Most of the professionals from the civil society will simply have to make, because it will be they'll basically be left unemployed if they will not have a chance to operate. They will not have a chance to operate without the status of being a foreign agent. So that's how the things are for now. But we try to remain optimistic, because the Georgian community, the Georgian civil society is tight, and it's not really, and it's not that easy to place to have this blanket repressions in Georgia, because the population is 3 million. Everybody knows everybody, and authoritarianism also needs resources. And where are those resources? Okay, we have one oligarch, Bidzina Ivanishvili, and there is Russia, but we see that Russia cannot provide those resources for Syria, cannot provide, Russia is on the back foot, right? So all we have to do is withstand this another attack on the civil society from a single oligarch, and I think we have some fighting chance. So the situation is grim, but we're not there yet. It will take time to turn us into Belarus, and it will be way harder, because no matter how they crystallize the system, we still observe the dissent within the ranks of the police, even now. Even now, people resign, people choose. They're not loud, but they choose not to participate in this. I think the army will be the same, because they were trained by we had strategic partnership with the United States, and it won't be easy to turn them into some kind of pro-Russian army force. So and it will, and the government understands that Georgian people won't stand the bloodshed on the streets. So they use these tactics of threatening, intimidation, jailing, forcing out, but they have not come to the point of sacrifice. And they're trying to avoid it and they will try to avoid it. So I think that yes, we're the same tactics is used against us as in Russia and Belarus, but still we have the fighting chance. And I don't think this energy will evaporate. Even if this wave of protests does not work fully, I don't think that this energy will simply evaporate, because we have local elections in October next year. We have local self-governance elections, and then there is another fighting chance. So, well, it's a struggle, but we can cope for now.
I'm massively grateful to you for joining us and really helping to understand the situation there, but also pick out some of the mechanics that could be relevant to other countries struggling against this process of state capture by Russia, its proxies, its assets, and other would-be authoritarians. Shota, thank you so much for joining us. I know the audience would appreciate it. It's been an immense pleasure.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your attention to our region, to our country. It means really, it means much to us, because without the external pressure, internal pressure cannot survive. So thank you very much for doing this.